I'm Layla, 38, female, and my family just tried to cut me out of their lives after I'd spent the last decade financially supporting them. It didn't happen in a dramatic, door-slamming argument. It wasn't born from a heated screaming match. It happened in the quiet, sterile glow of my phone screen, delivered in a group text message that was as cowardly as it was cruel. But the story doesn't start with that text. It starts more than 10 years ago, with a phone call that had a very different tone. Back then, I was 27, just starting to find my footing as a wealth manager at a competitive firm in the city. My life was a whirlwind of long hours, complex market analyses, and the quiet satisfaction of building a future for myself. Then my mother, Helen, called me, her voice trembling with a panic I hadn't heard since my brother Leo had fallen out of a tree as a child. "Layla, honey," she'd sobbed into the phone. "It's all gone, everything is gone." "What's gone, Mom? Slow down, what happened?" I had asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "The money, Layla, your father, he made some investments. The man he met at the club, he promised it was a sure thing." The man at the club. It was always a man at the club, or a once-in-a-lifetime business opportunity, or a friend of a friend with a can't-miss tip. My father, Richard, was a good man in many ways, charming, quick with a joke, and unfailingly optimistic. But his optimism bled into recklessness when it came to money. He saw dollar signs where there were only warning signs. My grandparents, his parents, had left behind a substantial inheritance, a sum meant to secure my parents' comfort through their golden years. In less than 5 years, my father, with my mother's anxious but silent compliance, had squandered nearly all of it on a series of disastrous ventures. This last investment was the final nail in the coffin. They were on the verge of bankruptcy, and the bank was threatening to foreclose on the family home, the very house I grew up in. I drove down that weekend, my briefcase filled not with work files, but with every financial document I could find of theirs. The scene in the living room was bleak. My father sat slumped in his armchair, his usual boisterous energy completely gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated look. My mother just paced the worn carpet, wringing her hands. Leo, then just 21 and home from college for the summer, was vibrating with a nervous energy, looking from our parents to me, as if waiting for a solution to magically appear. That weekend, I stopped being just their daughter. I became their financial lifeline. I spent 48 hours at their dining room table, surrounded by threatening letters and bank statements. I negotiated with their creditors. I used my own burgeoning savings to pay the most immediate, pressing debts to keep the wolves from the door. And I laid out a plan. A harsh, uncompromising plan. "I can fix this," I told them, my voice sounding older and sterner than I felt. "But it has to be on my terms, completely." I explained the concept of an irrevocable family trust. We would put what little was left of their assets, including the house, into this trust. It would protect them from creditors and from themselves. I, with my professional expertise, would be the sole trustee. This meant I, and only I, could manage the funds, approve distributions, and make investment decisions. To supplement this, I would set up a direct deposit from my own personal bank account into theirs, a generous monthly sum to cover their bills, groceries, and a modest lifestyle. It was the only way. My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and relief. My mother just cried and nodded. Leo was quiet, his gaze fixed on me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher at the time. I now know it was the seed of resentment being planted. He wasn't seeing a sister saving the family, he was seeing an older sister taking control. They all signed the papers my lawyer drafted. They handed over the keys to their financial kingdom, and I, out of a deep and aching sense of duty, accepted the crown. For the first few years it worked. There was a palpable sense of gratitude. "What would we do without you, Layla?" my mother would say on the phone. "You're our guardian angel." My father, humbled, would ask for my advice before even buying a new lawnmower. I managed the trust meticulously, slowly growing the principal. I paid their property taxes, handled their insurance, and made sure the direct deposit from my personal account hit their bank on the first of every month without fail. But gratitude, I learned, has an expiration date. As the years passed and their financial stability became the new normal, the memory of their desperation faded. It was replaced by a creeping sense of entitlement. My monthly support wasn't a gift anymore, it was an expectation. The trust wasn't a safety net, it was a cage they started to rattle. They. The first major sign of trouble came about 3 years ago. Leo, now approaching 30, had flitted from one passion project to another, aspiring musician, freelance photographer, artisanal pickle maker, none of which ever generated a stable income. He came to a family dinner with a grand pitch. He wanted to launch a lifestyle brand and needed a $50,000 seed investment. He didn't ask me for a loan, he told our parents that the money should come from the trust. It's family money, after all, Leo had argued, waving his fork for emphasis. It's just sitting there, it should be used to help the family succeed. My father, his old, reckless optimism rekindled by his son's enthusiasm, immediately agreed. The boy's got a point, Layla. You have to take risks to get rewards. I calmly explained that the trust's purpose was to provide for their long-term care and preserve the family home, not to fund speculative business ventures. I said no. The mood in the room turned frosty. It's always no with you, Layla, Leo scoffed, throwing his napkin on the table. You like having the power, don't you? Holding the purse strings. I'm not holding them, Leo. I'm protecting them, I said, my voice tight. My mother, who had been silent, piped up. But honey, it's for your brother, can't you just release some of it, just this once? It wasn't just once. It was the beginning of a united front against me. I was no longer the savior, I was the warden. My monthly deposit was no longer enough. They wanted a new car. They wanted a lavish trip to Italy. They wanted to renovate the kitchen. Each time I gently explained the budget, I was met with sighs and passive-aggressive comments about how I was hoarding their money. My brother's comments became more pointed, dripping with poison. He'd talk about how his friends' parents were enjoying their retirement, not living on a strict allowance from their daughter. He was framing their security as my tyranny. And my parents, wanting to believe his version of reality over the uncomfortable truth of their own past failures, started to listen. The family I had saved was slowly turning on me, and I was too busy, too exhausted from my own life and the burden of theirs, to see how far it had gone. The shift from quiet resentment to open hostility was gradual, like the slow turning of a tide. It wasn't one single event, but a series of small, corrosive waves that eroded the foundation of our relationship. The family dinners I used to attend out of a sense of duty became tense, adversarial meetings. I started to feel less like a daughter and sister, and more like a financial officer reporting to a disgruntled board of directors. A few months ago, we had gathered for my father's 68th birthday. I had brought a thoughtful, expensive gift, a first-edition copy of a book by his favorite author that I had spent weeks tracking down. He unwrapped it, gave a cursory, "Oh, that's nice, Layla," and set it aside. The real focus of the evening, it turned out, was Leo's latest grievance. You know, the Martins down the street just got back from a cruise to Alaska, Leo said, pointedly not looking at me. Their son, Jeff, he makes sure his parents have a good time. He doesn't keep them on a leash. I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. I chose to ignore the barb, turning to my mother. The garden looks lovely this year, Mom. She gave me a weak smile. It's a lot of work. Your father's back isn't what it used to be. We were thinking of hiring a professional landscaping service. That's a good idea, I said carefully. We can look at the budget. I'm sure we can allocate some funds for basic lawn care. Basic lawn care, Richard boomed, his voice a little too loud. Helen wants a full redesign, a water feature, new flower beds, but I suppose that's not in your budget for us, is it, Layla? It's not my budget, Dad. It's the budget, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. It's based on the trust's income and what's sustainable long-term. A full redesign would cost thousands of dollars that should be reserved for healthcare or home repairs. Healthcare home repairs? You talk like we're ancient, he grumbled, taking a large gulp of wine. We just want to enjoy the money our parents left for us. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. They were only able to live in that house and have any money at all because I had stopped them from losing everything. But that fact had been conveniently erased from the family history. In its place was this new narrative, authored by Leo, where I was the villain. Layla's right, Dad, I said, looking straight at my brother. The money needs to be managed responsibly. Leo let out a short, bitter laugh. Responsibly, or do you just mean under your complete control? He leaned forward, his eyes glinting. I've been doing some reading about trusts. A trustee has a fiduciary duty to the beneficiaries. That means you're supposed to act in our best interest, and I'm not sure you are. My blood ran cold. He had been researching. He wasn't just complaining anymore, he was looking for ammunition. Leo, I am a licensed professional, I said, my voice clipped. I manage multi-million-dollar portfolios for a living. I assure you, I am acting in the family's best interest by preventing it from going bankrupt again. The word bankrupt hung in the air like a foul odor. My father flinched. My mother looked down at her plate. It was the one word they couldn't stand, the stark reminder of their own failure. There's no need to be so nasty, Layla, my mother said quietly, her loyalty shifting to coddle their wounded pride. Even my Uncle Mark, my mother's brother, who had come for the birthday dinner, decided to chime in. Mark was a simple man who had floated through life on a current of complacency. He had always been a beneficiary of my generosity, enjoying the holiday meals I paid for and the stability I brought to his sister's life. But his allegiance was always to the path of least resistance. You know, Layla, maybe you could loosen up a little, he said, trying to sound like a wise peacemaker. They're not getting any younger. Let them have some fun. I looked around the table. My father sullen and resentful, my mother anxious and appeasing, my uncle a useless echo, and my brother the puppet master smirking with the satisfaction of a battle won. They were all united. I was the outsider in my own family. The rest of the dinner was a blur of stilted conversation. I felt a profound sense of emotional exhaustion wash over me. For 10 years, I had carried the weight of their well-being on my shoulders. I had sacrificed my time, my money, and my peace of mind. I had put their needs before my own countless times. I never took lavish vacations myself because I was always conscious of the money I was sending them. I had delayed buying my own apartment for years, choosing instead to pour my resources into shoring up their precarious finances. And my reward was to be treated like a tyrant, a jailer. For the first time, a dangerous thought entered my mind. What if I just stopped? The thought was terrifying, but also strangely liberating. What would happen if I just let go of the rope? They would fall, certainly, but I would be free. I pushed the thought away, chalking it up to frustration. My sense of duty was too ingrained, too deep. I couldn't abandon them. On my drive home that night, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. I expected an apology, or at least an attempt to smooth things over. Instead, the message read, "Your brother is only looking out for us. You should try to see things from his perspective. He has some very good ideas about how the trust could be more flexible." I didn't reply. I just stared at the words on the screen, the headlights of oncoming cars flashing in my eyes. They weren't just listening to him anymore. They were actively collaborating with him. The storm wasn't just gathering on the horizon, it was already overhead, and I was standing alone in the rain. I just didn't realize that the lightning was about to strike. The days following my father's birthday were filled with a tense, brittle silence. The usual stream of casual texts from my mother, pictures of her garden, questions about her favorite TV show, stopped completely. The only communications I received were curt, formal emails regarding bills that needed paying from the trust account, which I handled with cool, professional detachment. It was a Cold War, and I was beginning to suspect they were planning a new offensive. I just never imagined it would be so clumsy and so final. The text arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office, in the middle of a high-stakes conference call, finalizing a major deal for one of my most important clients. My phone, set to silent, lit up on the corner of my desk. I glanced at it, saw the notification was a group message from family, and assumed it was another logistical question. I gave my phone a half-second glance, just enough to read the first line of the preview. My brain registered the words, but my mouth kept moving, speaking calmly to my client about risk mitigation and asset allocation. The moment I hung up the call, an eerie sense of dread washed over me. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the phone. I opened the message, my heart pounding a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. It was a group text from my father's number, but the language was stilted, corporate, and so clearly composed by my brother Leo. The recipients were me, my mother, Leo, and my uncle Mark. The message read, "After much discussion, we have decided that the current family dynamic is unhealthy. The financial arrangements have created a power imbalance that is no longer tenable. We need space to reevaluate our path forward, independently. Please respect our wishes and do not reach out to us. Nymore, we will be in touch when we are ready to discuss the transition of the trust's management." I read it once, then twice. The words seemed to float off the screen, cold and alien. Unhealthy, power imbalance, no longer tenable. It was the sterile language of a corporate firing, not a message to a daughter and sister. They were firing me from my own family. A wave of dizziness hit me, and I gripped the edge of my desk. The initial shock felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. 10 years of sacrifice, of sleepless nights worrying about their bills, of putting their security above my own comfort, all of it erased by a few cowardly sentences. They didn't have the courage to say this to my face or even in a phone call. They had huddled together, drafted this pathetic little decree, and fired it at me from a safe distance. Then, my eyes drifted down below the message. And that's when the hurt began to curdle into something else entirely. Something cold and hard and sharp. Underneath the text bubble, there was a small notification. Liked by Mark. My uncle, my quiet, go-along-to-get-along uncle. The man who had sat at countless holiday tables that I had paid for. The man who had borrowed money from me a few years back for a dental emergency, which I had given him without a second thought and told him never to worry about paying back. He hadn't added any words of his own. He hadn't tried to play the peacemaker. He had simply clicked like, a tiny, digital thumbs up endorsing my excommunication. It was such a small, petty gesture, but it was the thing that broke me. It was the confirmation that this wasn't just my parents being manipulated by my brother. This was a consensus. It was a coup, and the entire family was in on it. They had all stood behind Leo, loaded the gun, and let him pull the trigger. And Uncle Mark had given them a little pat on the back for doing it. The hurt didn't vanish, but it was suddenly eclipsed by a glacial rage. A clarity I had never felt before descended upon me. The years of emotional exhaustion, of feeling unappreciated, of being taken for granted, it all coalesced into a single, diamond-hard point of understanding. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as an obstacle. An obstacle between them and the money they felt was rightfully theirs. They believed that by cutting me off emotionally, they could bully me into handing over the keys to the vault. They had fundamentally misunderstood the last 10 years. They thought my support was a sign of my weakness, of my inability to say no to them. They didn't realize it was a choice I made every single day out of love and duty. And they had just given me the permission, no, the instruction, to stop making it. Please respect our wishes, and do not reach out to us anymore. The words echoed in my head. It wasn't a request, it was an order I suddenly felt incredibly, powerfully willing to obey. My trembling stopped. My breathing evened out. I looked at their pathetic, calculated message, and I felt the last vestiges of my sentimental attachment to them wither and die. My fingers moved across the screen, my movements precise and deliberate. I selected the message thread and began to type my reply. There was no anger in my words, no pleading, no questions, just a simple, factual acknowledgement of their terms. Of course, I'll cancel my direct deposits first thing. I hit send. As the little blue bubble popped up on my screen, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. They thought they had started a war, They had no idea they had just handed me the terms of their own unconditional surrender. The battle was already over. They just didn't know it yet. The workday ended in a blur. I went through the motions, my mind a cool, quiet space where calculations were being made. I drove home not to the apartment I rented, but to the life I had built, a life that had always had a significant portion carved out and reserved for my family. As I walked through my front door, I felt the weight of that reservation lift. The space it left behind didn't feel empty, it felt open. I didn't pour a drink, I didn't turn on the TV. I walked straight to my home office, sat down in my leather chair, and opened my laptop. The rage had subsided, leaving in its place an ice-cold resolve. This would not be an emotional outburst. This would be a methodical, systematic dismantling of the financial ecosystem I had single-handedly built and maintained for them for over a decade. They wanted space. I would give them an abyss. First, the most straightforward action. I logged into my personal online banking portal. I navigated to the Transfers and Payments section. There it was, a recurring monthly transfer scheduled for the first of every month. The description simply read, "Family support." The amount was substantial, enough to cover all their utilities, groceries, insurance premiums, and leave them with comfortable spending mode. Why it was a significant percentage of my own take-home pay. For 120 consecutive months, that transfer had gone through without fail. I clicked on the transaction, and the system presented me with a simple question. "Are you sure you want to delete this scheduled transfer?" I clicked Confirm. A small green checkmark appeared. Done. Next, the family trust. This required more care. I wasn't acting as Layla, the spurned daughter. I was acting as Layla, the trustee. I opened the secure portal for the trust's management. I had a fiduciary duty, as Leo had so helpfully pointed out, to protect the trust's assets. I began to compose a formal memo for the trust's official records, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Memorandum for the record. Subject: immediate suspension of all non-essential distributions. Date: current date. As trustee, I have received a formal written communication from the beneficiaries, Richard, Helen, and Leo, expressing extreme hostility and a desire to sever all contact. The communication explicitly states their intent to transition the trust's management, indicating a coordinated effort to seize control of the assets. Their past history of severe financial mismanagement, which necessitated the creation of this trust, combined with their current stated intentions, represents a clear and present danger to the long-term solvency of the principal. Their desire for more flexible use of the funds, as previously communicated, suggests fiscally reckless plans that would violate the foundational purpose of the trust. Therefore, to fulfill my fiduciary duty to preserve the trust's assets from imminent and demonstrable risk, I am hereby freezing all discretionary and non-essential distributions, effective immediately. All assets will be held pending a formal review of the beneficiaries' hostile actions and a legal assessment of the threat they pose to the trust. No further funds will be dispersed until this review is complete. I saved the document as a PDF and uploaded it to the official file. Then, I went into the administrative settings and placed a hold on all outgoing payments. The digital vault was now sealed. They wouldn't be able to access a single penny. Third, the vacation fund. This was simpler, as it was entirely discretionary and entirely my own money. About 5 years ago, feeling a pang of guilt that they never traveled, I had opened a separate high-yield savings account. Every month, I deposited a few $100s into it, earmarking it for a future trip for them. It had grown to a considerable sum, over $20,000. I had pictured them on that cruise to Alaska that Leo had mentioned, or maybe finally taking that trip to Italy. I logged into that account. The name on it was mine alone. I initiated a full balance transfer to my primary savings account. The transaction was instant. The vacation fund was empty. Finally, the most complex and most devastating piece, the taxes. When I had set up the trust, the family home was the main asset. The property and estate taxes were complicated and substantial. For 10 years, I had managed and paid them through an account linked to the trust, ensuring they were never late, never incurred a penalty. It was a silent, invisible service they had long forgotten was even being performed. I logged into the state and county tax portals. I meticulously unlinked my payment information and the trust's accounts. I then drafted a formal, legally airtight notice, using a standard template. It informed the registered homeowners, Richard and Helen, that as of the current date, the third-party management of their property tax obligations was terminated. It detailed the upcoming deadlines for the next quarterly payments and wished them well in managing their civic responsibilities. I scheduled it to be sent via certified mail the next morning. They wouldn't just be without their allowance. In a few weeks, they would be facing a massive tax bill with no means to pay it. I closed my laptop. The entire operation had taken less than an hour. My office was silent. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt a profound and surprising emptiness, the kind that comes after a necessary but painful amputation. I had surgically removed them from my life and myself from theirs. Then a new thought surfaced. The financial ties were severed, but there was one last thing. A thread not of money but of memory, of legacy. The things in my father's study. The one part of our family history that they had ignored, but that I held sacred. They had made it clear that I was no longer part of the family's future. It seemed only right that I should take a piece of its honorable past with me. I stood up, grabbed my car keys, and walked out the door. The night was dark and the streets were quiet. I knew their Tuesday night routine. It was cards at the neighbor's house until at least 11. I had plenty of time. The 10-minute drive to my childhood home felt like a journey across a foreign land. Every landmark, the park where I'd scraped my knee, the corner store where I'd spent my allowance, seemed to belong to a different person, a different life. I pulled up to the curb a block away, the engine's hum sounding deafening in the suburban quiet. The house was dark, except for a single porch light casting long, familiar shadows across the lawn I used to mow. I walked up the driveway, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the concrete. My key, a copy I'd had for 20 years, slid into the lock. It turned with a well-oiled click that I had heard 1,000 times. The sound echoed in the silent house. As I stepped inside, the air was thick with the scent of my mother's lavender potpourri and my father's faint, lingering pipe tobacco. It was the smell of home, but it offered no comfort. It felt like trespassing. I didn't turn on the lights, letting my eyes adjust to the dim glow filtering through the windows. I walked past the living room, a museum of our family life. The mantelpiece was crowded with framed photos, me and Leo as gap-toothed children, school portraits, awkward family vacation shots. In every image, we were smiling. It felt like a lie. I bypassed it all. I walked straight down the hall to my father's study. It was his sanctuary, the one room that was more his than anyone else's. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was dominated by a large oak desk, but my destination was in the corner, a heavy, dark-stained wooden chest that had once belonged to my grandfather. My grandfather Arthur, the man I was almost named after, was the hero of our family lore. He was a man of quiet integrity, a decorated veteran who had come home from the war, built a life, and commanded respect without ever raising his voice. He was everything his son, my father, was not. While the rest of the family paid lip service to his memory, I was the one who had sat at his feet as a little girl, listening to his stories. They saw him as a portrait on the wall. I saw him as a man. The chest was not locked. They never saw the need. To them, it was just a dusty box of old things. I knelt and lifted the heavy lid. The scent of old paper and cedar filled the small room. There, nestled in yellowing tissue paper, was our family's real treasure. On top lay the medals, resting in their velvet-lined display cases. The Purple Heart for the shrapnel he took in his leg. The Bronze Star for an act of bravery he never spoke of. I traced the cool metal with my fingertips. They were not just awards, they were proof. Proof of a legacy of honor, of sacrifice, of doing the hard thing because it was the right thing. Beneath the medals were the journals. 4 thick, leather-bound books, their pages filled with his elegant, looping cursive. He had written in them every day for 40 years. They were not dramatic accounts, but simple, honest records of a life well lived. The price of feed, the birth of his children, his thoughts on the changing world, his quiet love for my grandmother. I had read them all, finding more wisdom in those simple entries than in any book I'd studied. Finally, at the bottom, were his official service records. The discharge papers, the commendations, the black and white photos of a young man with my father's smile, but with steady, serious eyes. This was the history of the best of us. I looked at these sacred objects, and I thought of the text message on my phone. I thought of my father's weakness, my mother's complicity, my brother's poisonous jealousy, and my uncle's casual betrayal. They had cheapened the family name. They had abandoned the very principles my grandfather had embodied. They didn't deserve to be the keepers of his legacy. They didn't even value it. To them, this chest was clutter. To me, it was my entire heritage. Carefully, reverently, I began to pack the items into the sturdy canvas tote bag I had brought. The medals went in first, wrapped in their tissue paper. Then the journals, which I stacked neatly. Finally, the folder of records. I left behind the chest itself, and a few of his old pipes that I knew my father cherished for sentimental reasons. I was not a thief acting out of spite. I was a curator, preserving priceless artifacts from those who could no longer be trusted with their care. With the bag heavy in my hand, I stood up and took one last look around the study. Nothing looked out of place. They wouldn't notice for weeks, maybe months. Maybe not until they were packing up the house to sell it. The thought sent a pang through my chest, but I pushed it away. This was the path they had chosen. I walked back through the silent house, my footsteps lighter this time. I closed the front door behind me, the click of the latch sounding final, absolute. As I walked back to my car, under the pale light of the moon, I didn't feel like I was stealing from my family. I felt like I was taking back the only part of it that had ever been truly mine. They could have the house, the arguments, and the money problems. I would take my grandfather's honor and walk away. Sleep did not come. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind a strange cocktail of grief, adrenaline, and an unnerving calm. The hours ticked by. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. I knew what was coming. The first domino had fallen the moment I canceled my direct deposit, but the rest of the chain reaction was timed to the rhythms of their own lives. The moment they would first need money and find it gone. A pre-dawn trip to the ATM for my father, or Leo trying to buy late-night snacks with a suddenly useless debit card. My phone, lying face down on my nightstand, remained dark and silent. The quiet was more unnerving than the anticipated storm. For a moment, I wondered if I had misjudged them. Perhaps they would take this in stride, find a way to manage, and truly embrace the space they had demanded. The fantasy shattered at exactly 4:02 a.m. My phone exploded into a cacophony of buzzing and ringing, vibrating violently against the wood of my nightstand. The screen lit up the dark room. Leo calling. I watched it ring, and ring, and ring. It went to voicemail. A second later, it started again. Leo calling. I let it go to voicemail again. He was frantic, desperate. The calls came one after another, a relentless, panicked barrage. I counted them. 7, 8, 9 times. He wasn't just trying to reach me, he was smashing his thumb against the screen in a blind panic. A string of text messages started to pour in. Layla, pick up the phone. It's an emergency. The card was declined. What did you do? Mom is crying, call me right now. I watched the messages appear, my face completely passive. There was no surge of pity, no flicker of guilt. There was only the cold, distant feeling of observing a predictable outcome. This was the inevitable result of their own actions, the consequence they had engineered but never anticipated. The calls continued. 10, 11, 12. I silenced my phone, but the screen continued to flash his name. By the time it stopped at 4:19 a.m., he had called 17 times. I waited in the silence for a few minutes, letting the frantic energy dissipate. I picked up my phone and opened our message thread. I looked at his wall of panicked blue bubbles. Then I typed my response, the words my own quiet echo of the message they had sent me just 12 hours before. Wishing you all the distance you asked for. I sent it, then I blocked his number. I watched his contact picture disappear from my recent calls list, and an incredible wave of quiet washed over me. One down. It wasn't long before the next wave hit. At around 6:30 a.m., my mother started. Her approach was different. First, a series of questioning texts. Layla's honey, are you awake? Something seems to be wrong with the bank account. Leo couldn't get gas. Please call me. I think there's been some kind of mistake. When I didn't respond, her calls began. Her ringtone, a gentle chime I had once found soothing, now sounded grating. I let each call go to voicemail. Her tone in the messages she left grew progressively more strained, shifting from confusion to concern, and then to outright panic. Layla, please pick up. Richard went to the bank and they said the account is nearly empty. And the trust. They said there's a hold on it. This has to be a mistake. Please call me and fix this. Fix this. The familiar refrain of my entire adult life. I was the family fixer, but I was officially retired. I blocked her number. Finally, around 8 a.m., my father began his assault. There was no preamble, no gentle questioning, just a flood of angry, accusatory texts. What have you done? This is our money, you have no right. You will turn the trust back on immediately, or you'll hear from our lawyer. His calls were furious and insistent. I pictured him, his face red and puffy, stomping around the living room, a stark contrast to the defeated man I had saved from that very room 10 years ago. It was fascinating how quickly his pride returned when he felt he was in a position of power. Now that his power was revealed to be an illusion, all that was left was impotent rage. I blocked his number, and then, for good measure, I blocked my Uncle Mark. The silence that followed was absolute. My phone, for the first time in as long as I could remember, was completely and totally quiet. No panicked calls, no demanding texts, no passive-aggressive messages, nothing. I got out of bed, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window watching the sunrise. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and orange. It was a beautiful, peaceful morning. The chaos was happening somewhere else, miles away, behind a digital wall I had erected. They were in their house, a cauldron of fear and anger, realizing the full scope of their miscalculation. They were trapped in the consequences of their own greed, and I was free. The feeling was so profound, so dizzying, it felt like taking my first breath after being held underwater for a very long time. The unraveling was theirs, not mine. My life was finally, blessedly, beginning to knit itself back together. The first few weeks of silence were a revelation. I discovered how much of my mental and emotional energy had been consumed by my family. Freed from the constant, low-grade anxiety of their next demand or their latest manufactured drama, my world seemed to expand. My work performance sharpened. I reconnected with friends I had unintentionally neglected. I slept through the night, every night. I was grieving the family I wished I had, but I was simultaneously celebrating my liberation from the one I actually had. I hired a therapist, a compassionate woman who helped me unpack a decade of misplaced duty and emotional neglect. About a month after the text message, the first official counterattack arrived. A crisp, formal letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. It was full of blustering legal threats, accusing me of malicious breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of funds, and causing emotional distress. It demanded the immediate reinstatement of all funds and a complete handover of the trust's management to their new representative, my brother Leo. I scanned the letter, feeling a distant amusement. They had scraped together enough money to hire the most bombastic, aggressive-looking lawyer they could find. I forwarded the letter to my own lawyer, a calm, methodical man who had helped me draft the original trust documents. His reply came 2 hours later. Layla, he wrote, this is amateur hour. They have no legal standing. The trust is irrevocable, your authority as trustee is absolute, and your documented justification for freezing the assets is perfectly sound. Their own written communication provides all the evidence we need that they posed a threat to the trust. Do not worry, I will handle this. My lawyer's response to theirs was a masterclass in polite, legal annihilation. He cited the specific clauses in the trust document they had all signed. He included a copy of their text message and my memo for the record. He pointed out that any further baseless legal action would be met with a countersuit for harassment. We never heard from that lawyer again. News of the fallout trickled back to me through a cousin, Sarah, who had always remained a neutral and kind presence in my life. She called one afternoon, her voice hesitant. "Layla, I'm not calling to take sides," she began, "but things are really bad over there." "I imagine they are," I said calmly. Sarah sighed. "Your dad had to sell his car. Leo lost his apartment because you were the one co-signing his lease and paying half his rent, something I don't think anyone knew. He had to move back home. He found some job stocking shelves at a grocery store. And the house, Layla, they got a pre-foreclosure notice. They haven't paid the property taxes." I felt a faint, vestigial pang of something, not guilt, but a deep sadness for the whole pathetic situation. "And they've noticed that Grandpa Arthur's things are gone," Sarah added, her voice dropping. "Uncle Richard is telling everyone you broke in and stole them. Aunt Helen is a wreck." "I didn't break in, Sarah. I used my key," I said softly. "And I didn't steal them, I rescued them." I knew this was the end of the line. They were at rock bottom, the place I had pulled them from 10 years earlier. But this time, I wouldn't be their lifeline. To do so would be to invalidate my own pain, my own sanity. It would teach them nothing. The cycle would just begin again. But I also couldn't let my grandfather's home be seized by the state. That felt like a betrayal of his memory. After a long conversation with my therapist and my lawyer, I decided on my final move, not an act of reconciliation, but an act of closure. My lawyer drafted the documents for a new, smaller, and utterly inflexible trust. Into it, I placed a modest sum of money. The trust's sole purpose was twofold. First, to pay the annual property taxes on the family home directly to the county, ensuring it would never be at risk again. Second, to provide a meager monthly stipend to my parents, sent via payment card, with just enough funds for basic groceries and utilities. It was a fraction of what they were used to, an amount that would force a life of disciplined frugality upon them. The most important clause was that the trust would be managed by a neutral corporate third party. I would have no access or control. More importantly, the terms forbade the trustee from accepting any communication from the beneficiaries. My parents could not call to ask for more money. Leo could not demand an advance. There was no one to bully, no one to manipulate. It was an automated, unchangeable, unfeeling system of basic provision. It was my final act of duty, stripped of all emotion. It was an echo of support. Tea offered from an unbridgeable distance. The last I heard, they were still living in the house. Leo still works at the grocery store. My parents live a quiet, dramatically downsized life. They have the space they asked for, an entire universe of it. As for me, I finally bought my own apartment, a bright, airy space that is entirely mine. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I take out my grandfather's journals. I run my fingers over his elegant handwriting and read about a life built on strength and integrity. I took his legacy with me, and in doing so, I found my own. The financial cost of supporting my family for a decade was high, but the price of my freedom and peace of mind was far higher. And it was worth every penny. So, for anyone out there who finds themselves in a similar position, being the sole pillar holding up a roof for people who do nothing but weaken the foundation, I ask you this: what would happen if you just walked away? What if you let them have the space they seem to be asking for? You might just find that the space you create is the one you needed for yourself all along.